Hello, everybody. Welcome and thank you very much for taking time out of your busy diary to join us today. My name is Johnny Briggs. I am the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion and Talent Acquisition Director at Aviva, and I'm based in London. And I have four guests that are joining me that I'm going to ask to introduce shortly, but I was just going to give a bit of context in terms of this conversation we're about to have. Now, firstly, hopefully you can see an enormous big Mentimeter QR code on your screen. So could I ask you, if you were able to, could you please use your picture to take that, and then we will ask a question on that. So if the Mentimeter is there now or is to come, I would ask you if you could do that. That would be very grateful. So just a couple of things. Firstly, I hope you've attended lots of sessions for Dive In this year in whatever country that you're in and whatever organisation or status you're in. But this year's theme is unlocking innovation. And I say that just so that as we're going through this conversation, that you can have that in mind. What might be innovative for the future in regard to race and ethnicity. So that's just something I would ask you to be mindful for. Just to bring a bit of context, I want to give a quote from Jane Elliott, who's an American diversity educator. And she stated that she highlighted that race and ethnicity are not the same. She said that race is a social construct that has historically been used to classify human beings according to physical or biological characteristics. And ethnicity is something a person acquires or ascribes to and refers to as a shared cultural, such as language, practices, and beliefs. We agreed that it's perfectly acceptable for individuals to describe themselves by race, but the event wishes to highlight the negative impact of some assumptions based on race, ethnicity, as a one-size-fits-all, to discuss the dangers of stereotyping experience based on race, ethnicity, etc., the downfall of drawing unnecessary attention to somebody's race or ethnicity. And I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. Please use the Q&A, pass any kind of questions that you have, and I shall make sure we put them to the panel. So very quickly, just to say, what's this conversation around? So it's amongst a whole host of things, but to frame it slightly, we've said it's past, present and future. So past, we responded to the urgent need to have the race conversation with organisations in 2020, so recent past. Present, is the conversation now dying? Has the conversation been labelled too woke? We want to address any provocative statements that you might have in wider society. And then for the future, your thoughts of what the conversation might look like moving forwards. And that's just some of the suggestions. It's up to you. That's very much the purpose of having this conversation. So please do let us know what your thoughts are. But enough of me. Let's go and chat to find out who the four people joining me are. They are, take my word for it, they're brilliant, but I'm going to ask them just to introduce themselves. So can I first of all come to you, Gunjali? Can you just let everybody know who you are and what you've been doing?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much. First of all, welcome to Dive In. This is day 3 here in the US. I'm based in Chicago. And just to make everybody jealous, here in the US, we're actually hosting an in-person Dive In session for the rest of the day today. So next year, please plan to be here. But my name is Gunjali Rana. I work for CNA. I am their diversity, equity, and inclusion person. I run that office. And I've been there in the role about 2 years, roughly. And I come from previous insurance companies and have been watching, like everybody else, the sort of racial equity debate, as it were, throughout over the past couple of years. So very interested to be in this conversation and looking forward to hearing more. I'll turn it back to you, John.
Well, welcome and thank you. Aggie, could I come to you for you to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Johnny. Really happy to be here with you all today. Brilliant festival, and it's also National Inclusion Week as well. So brilliant in lots of different ways. So I am dialing in from the UK in London, SOAS University, actually, is where I am right now. I am a diversity and inclusion strategist and the leading consulting director and CEO of an organization called Mahogany Inclusion Partners. As the name probably suggests, it's a diversity and inclusion and racial equity consultancy, and we work with organizations cross-industry, so big names you'd have heard of, a couple of them in the insurance industry, work on everything from strategy to audits, etc. And this conversation that we're having today, I think it's really important, and really looking forward to hearing your questions, audience, but definitely hearing from the panelists as well. So I shall pass the mic back to you, Johnny.
Thanks, Aggie. Ibby, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm happy to, and thanks for inviting me. I'm not in a salubrious location like Aggie. I'm in the spare bedroom in Sussex in the UK. But it is a pleasure to be here, and I guess I'd also say hello to my colleagues in QBE who are in London at the watch party. Hi, guys. So I'm the COO for QBE Re Insurance. I've been at QBE kind of nearly 2 years, and I've been involved in the race and ethnicity debate since I joined in with my previous company, where in both companies I'm the sponsor or co-sponsor, as it is, of the employee network that promotes race and race inclusion and race awareness within QBE. So it's a pleasure to be here as part of the panel, and look forward to taking part in the debate.
And thank you for joining. And just before I go to Charmaine, just if you make sure, Menti, if you go on, answer the question, and then I will bring the results up just before we start having the conversation. But Charmaine, would you mind introducing yourself?
Absolutely. So hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. Thanks to the folks at Dive In, and cheers to 9 years. My name is Charmaine Rice. I'm a Black woman, wife, mom, sister, niece, an avid book reader, a lover of travel and people, and I consider myself to be a Jeopardy aficionado. I'm dialing in from Cleveland, Ohio, where I work at AmTrust Financial, and hello to all of my AmTrust International friends. Thank you for connecting me to this opportunity. My professional and personal commitments are aligned. I support learning, development, and diversity, and I'm honored to be in the company of these great panelists today.
That is brilliant. Thank you, Charmaine. I should say, actually, I didn't realise we were doing location as well. I am based in London, but I am actually in our Dublin office today, which is a real joy. And we're going out for a quiz tonight, which I shared with the panelists earlier. I'm slightly apprehensive about how much value I will be in this quiz. So I'm hoping that they're going to cover Scottish football. But we will wait and see how that goes. So the most important point, which I didn't say at the beginning, was please ask questions. So that's the point of this. It's about what's in your mind. What would you like to put to the panel? And I will put as many questions as I possibly can. We've had a number pre-submitted, which I'm going to do now. But I'd be really keen to find out a bit about what's in your mind. And whatever, as I say, it's a broad subject. Let's see where we're going to in regard to that. I'll talk as some of those responses come in. It's now coming in. I have to say, so without putting a neck in the line, I hope that most are attempting to collect data. I understand that in some countries there are legal restrictions, but certainly we would hope that most will be doing that, and that seems to be playing out in terms of where we are with Menti. So I'm going to let that kind of keep going as I then start to ask a few questions. So Kunjali, I want to come to you first, if that's okay. Broad question. What are the barriers people face when entering insurance as a career?
Yeah, and it's a good question, and it's something that luckily has been studied. So I think there's a two-part study actually that was done here in the US for sure. And it's interesting because I think the results actually carry through worldwide. And the study was done actually with the National African American Insurance Association, MARSH, and APCIA. Somebody called Dr. Nunnery did the study. We invited him here to CNA early this year, in February of this year, to kind of explain what the study was about. He specifically talked about 3 barriers to entry to the insurance industry. It was lack of exposure. So not knowing that insurance is a viable career, right? It was lack of networks that actually get you there. So making sure, so even if you do know that you could go into insurance, there isn't a way for you to find out who else is in there and how do I get in? So the barrier to entry is high there. And then the third piece, which really relates a little more to kind of advancing and retaining, is lack of mentorship to advance when you do get in there. So those were sort of 3 of the sort of barriers that were identified. If you think about it, 2 of those are actually a perception problem. There's plenty of individuals, plenty of youth who don't realize that careers in insurance are a possibility, but even when they do, they don't have the knowledge or information to really get in there. How do I get to a career in insurance? And the second thing is, I think there's also this myth around the idea that I can only work in insurance if I'm good at math. That's not true either. There's plenty of careers to be had in the insurance industry. You could work in DEI, you could work in HR, you could be a social media person, could be a technologist, all within the insurance industry. So I think that's a couple of the myths and a couple of the barriers that I think keep people from showing up in the insurance sector.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. I have to say, from my talent acquisition point of view, we constantly remind hiring managers to focus on capability. And unfortunately, I think they just very often, it's so easy to focus on technical skills. And that means that we just end up with the same population. And your point about bringing a new audience, for those that don't know insurance is so important. Thank you for that. Just to my other panelists, I don't know if there's anyone that has anything that would like to add to that their experience in terms of just things that we need to do about the attraction or lack of attraction towards the insurance industry.
I'm happy to weigh in.
Thank you, Charmaine.
As Gunjali shared, NIA has done extensive research that extends beyond simply Black and African American individuals. Omari Aarons, the current executive director and chief operating officer of NIA, actually came in and spoke to our executive committee, and he shared his own story about his transition into insurance. And one of the things that he said was people need to be invited in, and representation helps with that. So it also helps when everyone is committed to developing their own cultural competence. Inclusion is a shared responsibility. It's one of our core values at AmTrust. And we really focus hard to make sure that leaders know and understand their own identity attributes, not to create an oppression Olympics, but simply to understand that when we use words like diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, we're really referring to all of us. And so that helps to address some of the barriers, either real or perceived, with getting people in the door and allowing them to feel comfortable in the space.
Point. Thank you, Charmaine. So moving on
I love that.
Go on, Aggie.
I love that. Yeah, sorry, if you don't mind. Yes, I love what you've just shared there, Charmaine. And I'm just going to pick up on that piece around real or perceived. I think on the real, we have data, don't we? I'm sure most organizations have data. There is data around the insurance industry. So I think we can probably accept that there are some real barriers at the moment. But then also that perceived piece. I think it's about us as an industry thinking about what can we do to demystify and to, knock down these myths and let people know, as Charmaine said, that there's a place for you here. Let people know that there is development. And then to Gunjali's points around perceptions around the skill sets needed, let's really think about that attitude versus attitude balancing act and really sort of recruit and train, develop and retain according to that, as opposed to the traditional views.
Brilliant. Thank you. Ibi, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say something very, very similar in the same vein, which is that actually this is part of a broader attraction issue for the industry, right? Which I think has improved over years, but it's not just a race thing. Actually, it's an attraction thing, for females, etc. It's just a general attraction point that we need to try and tackle and take on as a challenge across the industry. Because people don't know this industry exists. They don't understand the diversity of opportunity, the diversity of roles, as has previously been highlighted, and the fact that we're not stereotypically all kind of actuaries or underwriters, right? There's a broad set of skills that can be utilized in the industry, and it's dynamic. If you look at digital online, personal lines insurance, it's very dynamic, etc. There are so many opportunities in the industry. So the more that we as a community can do to promote it and then start to reach down into schools and universities and those kind of things to promote this as an industry where people can come and build careers, I think the more we can do that just generally is good for the industry, and it's also good for this particular topic. So reinforcing what everyone said, really.
Right. Thank you, Ibi. And then moving on, I suppose, to kind of narrow it slightly down in terms of if somebody is going out to hire now, so we have got a role, we want to make sure we've got a balanced shortlist, but we're particularly, for example, looking at ethnicity. What are hiring managers, what are recruiters, what are individuals doing now to try and be more proactive when we've got kind of current needs to try and make sure that we get more diverse talent? Ibi, do you mind if I come to you just in terms of your role at the moment?
Yeah, I think we're doing a couple of things specifically within, say, QBE. I can give you some kind of examples of what we are doing. So one of them is a school partnership program where we're trying to get young people in from schools to kind of experience the industry, and they come in, they spend some time with us, and then the idea obviously is that they then go back, tell others about the industry, but hopefully they enjoy it enough to then want to join the industry, and that in particular is focused around minorities as well. So we get a number of folk through that particular initiative. And the other aspect is actually we partner with ICANN, which is the Insurance Cultural Awareness Network, and they have they have really good services around job boards where, you know, they attract a more culturally diverse, ethnically diverse set of candidates, and they can come on there, and we can kind of be joined from a talent acquisition perspective with folk who are looking to get into the industry. So they're kind of two, I guess, specific things that I can point to as a QBE and what we're doing.
Thank you. Aggie or Charmaine, is there anything that you would add in terms of just that you think would be useful for people to do when they're going out for either current or future vacancies?
Absolutely.
Yes. Oh, go ahead, Charmaine.
Ahead.
We're so polite. Yeah, sure. Well, there's a long list. I'll say a few, and then I'll hand the mic back over to Charmaine to pick up. So I think I would start at the beginning of the conversation around that clear commitment. What is it that we're trying to achieve? What does our data tell us? And even if we haven't got real data, you know, in this particular conversation, I'm going to say that we can sort of use our common sense data and look around the room and who's in the senior teams, etc. Even if we haven't got data and we can't collect it in our organization. So what is that real commitment? What are we trying to achieve? Well, how does that connect to who we are as an organization? I think some of the technical approaches, most organizations understand them. I think where the biggest stumbling block tends to be line leaders not understanding why. Why are we doing this? This doesn't feel fair. Shouldn't we treat everybody the same? Why are we targeting a particular race or a particular group of people? So that why is really important, and starting with that as the foundational piece. And then there's a piece around, let's not look where we've always looked for people. Let's not use the same search agencies that we've always used, because we're going to get the same thing. Let's broaden our search approaches, and actually even working with our current providers. Let's give them some SLAs. I forgot what SLAs are, but I forgot the acronym, but you know what I mean. Let's give them some parameters around who they send to us, how they're outreaching, and then there are many other things as well that I can talk about, but I'll pass the mic over to Charmaine now.
Thank you so much. Yes, so focusing on a diverse candidate pool is definitely key. As Aggie said, understanding the data and the story it tells, both quantitatively and qualitatively, is also critical. You know, we have to be really intentional about developing relationships with industry affinity groups. We are members of the Asian American Insurance Network, Latin American Association of Insurance Agencies, the National African American Insurance Association, and Rising Insurance Star Executives, which is one of those organizations that is focused on helping provide internship opportunities for youth that may be considering their career path and not quite sure what direction they want to go in. And so looking for those industry affinity groups, as well as identity aligned networking groups at universities and colleges, is key. I think it was Gunjali who said earlier, you don't have to be good at math to work in insurance, which is definitely true for me. I wouldn't be here if that was the stipulation. So addressing those myths is critical. And the best way to do that is by leveraging our current workforce. So really employing our colleagues and saying, let's go out together, you know, participate in these job fairs or career fairs and really share the story. Forums such as this, Dive In is a tremendous vehicle for inviting people in and letting them see that they're just regular people like you and I that are doing the work. And there's a space for, again, all of us at the table to come in and contribute.
Brilliant.
I love that. If I may add just one more thing, I'll promise one more thing around this. I think there's definitely a real focus on universities and schools, etc. Absolutely. What I'd also like to add is, you know, as we've just said, you don't have to be amazing at maths to work in insurance. Let's look at senior roles as well. So where can we look at other industries and bring people in? Because I think in a lot of traditional industries, such as insurance would be, there's this perception that you have to have grown up in insurance. If that's the mindset we have, we know it's not diverse already. So we're just going to be fishing from the same pool, which is not diverse yet. So let's think about how do we actually get people in at different levels in the organization as well. And those affinity groups that Charmaine was speaking about can support with that as well.
Totally agree.
And I never apologise for speaking on a webinar, so please always carry on with that. And even as the host, just that I would add parts in regard to that it's so important to, when you're going to other industries, be thoughtful. I mean, we always talk about insurance being regulated. Well, so is telecom, so is pharmaceuticals, so are so many other sectors that we can go and look at, and sometimes we just need to be brave. I'm going to, Charmaine, come to you if that's all right for this question that's quite long. And just a reminder, please ask your questions through the event. So the platform you've come through, there is a question and answer part to that. Please put your questions in there, and I will pick them up, and yours may well be the next one after this one that I ask from there. So, Charmaine, so what are insurance organisations doing to retain their talent that you know of, to address connected themes related to retention, culture, and leadership? So what about retention of current talent?
Yes, excellent question. So thinking about what we do to retain talent, it actually starts from the very beginning with making sure that we have a retention strategy, really taking the time to develop those relationships. And I think it's been mentioned here before, mentoring and leadership development. I often tell people that my experience entering into leadership or management was supported with a management training program. And I quite naively thought that was everyone's transition, until I learned from several of my counterparts that really they were the person that was promoted into the role, but not necessarily provided the support with, how do I lead others? How do I actually address this people management opportunity ahead of me? So the strategy is important, as well as the leadership commitment, thinking very intentionally about how we are recruiting, hiring, advancing, and retaining our talent, looking at inclusive performance management. So when we are giving feedback, how are we setting someone up for success? How are we making sure that we understand their strengths and capabilities, and offering them opportunities where they can strengthen those muscles? And then what are we doing to create an equitable and inclusive organizational culture? And finally, how are we engaging with the community? Because as Aggie mentioned, there are all stages of the employee life cycle that's represented in most of our workforces. How are we supporting individuals as they are transitioning through their career? So being very intentional, again, about leadership development, mentoring, but those other markers as well, as we're thinking about retention, is key to maintaining a diverse workforce that will lead us to that innovation, Johnny, that you spoke about at the very beginning of our discussion today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Charmaine. I was just going to see if Evie has anything to answer, and then I'll go to Gunjali and Aggie and see if they have anything to answer. But Evie, anything from QBE, from your experience around retention?
Not specifically QBE, but I guess my last how many years in the industry, I think the way we manage people's development and the way we plan for succession and all the rest of it, I think just in general probably could improve. And I think doing that with a specific race and ethnicity lens would be an important thing to do, and then adding in things like specific mentoring and those types of programs to help people plot their career through, because I think a lot of organizations may suffer from having actually very ethnic diverse populations, but probably at the wrong end of the organization, in the sense it's not replicated through the layers. And so it's, how do we get those folk, they're in the business, they're in the industry, but how do we get them promoted and ensure that they can forge a career? And then what comes with that also is kind of role modeling. I like the point earlier about, we always think of talent acquisition kind of at the more junior levels, but actually there's also talent acquisition at the senior levels, because we're lacking role models. So if we can start seeing folk, I like the point, I was going to make the same point about data. Sometimes you don't need data, right? You can just look and you can see it. So if we can see people that look like us, and then people can kind of see that actually they've got something to aspire to, and that people can make it who look similar to them. So there's some of those things I think we could really work on. But I think one particular point would be around the specific mentoring and development planning for folk from kind of more diverse backgrounds. I think that's something that we could focus on.
Right, thank you, Vic. Gunjali, anything you'd want to add? There's been quite a lot given already.
I absolutely appreciate what's being said so far, and I'll add sort of one more layer to it, which is when organizations have representation at the top, that is the highest ROI when it comes to retaining and when it comes to actually getting in both, right? It will assist both talent acquisition and talent retention, because suddenly you can see yourself up there. And when you can see it, then you know there is a path to it, right? Or there must be a path to it. So that there is a disproportionate ROI to really developing your diverse leaders and ensuring that they're moving up. One of the, if we talked about mentoring, which is 100% correct. I think there is mentoring required, but then there is also a difference between mentoring and sponsoring. And I find that what diverse people sometimes lack is having a sponsor. Just a, side note, mentor is, somebody you can talk to about, I'm having this problem and they can advise you. A sponsor is somebody who's talking about you when you're not in the room, when you don't have the access. And they're the ones putting you up for the project or saying, hey, I just worked on this with this person. I think they can do it. I think we need more sponsorship to start to advance people. And to get to that sponsorship, ironically, I think what might be needed is a little bit of reverse mentorship. And what I mean by that is having our senior leaders feel comfortable and in talking to the sort of diversity that's traditionally found at the bottom, at the kind of lower levels of the employee workforce.
Brilliant. Thank you, Julie. Aggie, anything to add before we move on?
Absolutely, yes. So I'm really loving this conversation. Absolutely, it's about mentorship, it's about sponsorship, and I love that distinction. And we call it mutual mentorship because both parties learn and both parties gain from those conversations. So I absolutely love that. And then that conversation about ensuring that we've got that representation across the whole organisation in the vertical levels too. What I'd also like to add to that is what does it actually feel like to work in that organisation as a person of colour? Because we're talking about race today. How are we asking our people how they're feeling? Ask them, how does it feel to work here? What have you experienced? Do you see yourself progressing in this organization? What are some of the challenges that we may not be aware of as a leadership team that we need to address? Because very often, and you'll probably see some reports where people are being recruited. So, people of color are being recruited into organizations, but they're not staying. They're not staying because all these beautiful promises are made at recruitment. And at that stage, when they get there, actually, when I walk into the room, I'm the only one in the room. Or when I walk into the room, I'm expected to speak the way everybody else does, but I don't. When I walk into our teams, they're talking about golfing and going to, I don't know, Martha's Vineyard and things like that. That's not really who I am or where I am. They want to go in the UK. They want to go to the pub all the time. That is not my culture. So it's about, let's definitely get the diversity in across the organization, but let's ensure that there's inclusion as well. And the only way to know that is to speak to our people, understand what it's like to work here, and then start to make those changes so that people do stay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Aggie, and thank you all. Now, just to let you all know, the question master, as in me, is now under a bit of pressure because we're getting lots of questions, which is brilliant, and keep it coming. What I might do is start maybe just going to one individual one question just to try and make sure we can cover as much as we can. But I'm going to lower it down slightly and we're going to go for two people. So I'm going to first of all come to you, Gunjali, and then I'll come to Ibi if it's okay, because the question is, does your organisation sponsor professional networks and encourage employees to join? So what have they got? What have they been asked to go to externally? And do you have ERGs, which are employee resource groups that are consulted for their expertise and the influence that they get? So firstly, could I come to you, Gunjali, if that is okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that question. It's a good one because that's another retention, another way to retain the talent that you've got is, having an ERG, employee resource group, sometimes called business resource groups or sometimes called affinity networks. But really, the idea is to have a place for our employees to go where if you are a person, so I'll give you an example of me, which is, I identify as Asian, as Indian specifically. We have an Asian network, an Asian ERG where I can go, where I can talk to people who look and sound like me, who understand that we're in the middle of, Indian festival season and what it means to kind of balance all of that. And similarly, we've got 8 other ERGs, and these, 8 of them are, some of them are sort of around ethnicity, some of them are around identity. And the idea really is to help people be comfortable, but there is a secondary, very useful reason for these ERGs to kind of exist and thrive and to support them. And that is around allyship. So how I was talking about that reverse mentorship that's needed sometimes because there's a lack of education or a lack of awareness of what's going on. At CNA, we've ensured that you don't have to identify as a thing to join it, right? So I can join our Empowering Black Professionals ERG and learn and figure out what it means and what are the things, right, that they care about. So it's a democratized free way for us to really understand and to get the education that we need so that we can make our teams feel included. So that's sort of one big way and one big reason. The other thing to think about ERGs when you're sort of designing them is how much support are they getting and what kind of support are they getting. So we've ensured that we have 2 co-leads that lead each of the 8 ERGs. We've got an executive sponsor who is a senior level leader at the company that's there for 2 years supporting the ERGs. There is a DEI council that's actually chaired by our CEO that's also there, that each of the ERGs get to present to at least once a year, and sometimes more, depending on what's going on. But the idea really is that our ERGs have become almost the engine of the DEI agenda at the company. Without, one of the other things I'm very careful about as a person of color is I don't want to burden the people that are already underrepresented with all of the work around that. And so I want to make sure that there is enough structure in place that they have the support that they need. And so that is what the Office of DEI is actually seeking to do, right? Is to try to give them the support that they need to move the agenda forward. And we've had a lot of success with these ERGs. They're global, so anybody can join them. And about a third of the company at the last count, which was June, a third of our company actually is a member of at least one ERG, which I take to be tremendous success if you think about sort of what the idea is. So I'll stop. I can go on about the ERGs for a very long time. So I will stop and hand it back to you.
We're delighted you're going on. That's absolutely brilliant. Ebby, what would you add?
So I think just to reconfirm that, like from a QBE perspective, is very similar. So very supportive of ERGs for lots of different things, and in particular, the race conversation. It gets the full executive support. I'm as I said, I'm the co-sponsor of it, and also very similarly, there's a DEI steering group chaired by the CEO, and all the networks kind of go there and talk about it, which is great. So very similar, and that we've also have a partnership with ICANN. Which is also great for promotion, and that gets promoted internally. So I think all positive stuff. I think just the additional thing I would add that we've tried to do is, to your point about not burdening people, we have spent a lot of time working with colleagues in in particular the broader people team, to try and break this topic up into kind of discrete things that we're going to do to try and tackle it, whether it's around acquisition, whether it's retention, development, etc., and then try and make sure there are folk within the broader organization who see this as part of their kind of targets and day jobs, because otherwise it becomes the burden of a very small group of people to try and do it. And we now have, which is great, like a 3-year kind of plan on the topic that we can now look at and track and kind of hold some different people accountable to helping us deliver, which should all add up to something that improves the QB environment for around this particular topic. And it's great. And then, of course, by linking that up overall with the other ERGs, what you're then doing is comparing notes and creating the same, because there's a lot of intersectionality in all of this, right? In terms of, the things you do in one place could be broad. They might start from a race conversation, but actually they could broaden them out across a number of different characteristics that we're trying to tackle. So I think that's all really positive. So they're, I guess, some of the QBE things we're doing.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And I'm going to move on. As I say, there's lots of questions. Please keep them coming. So I'm going to come first to Aggie and then Charmaine on this one. And it's an interesting one. I'm not sure how much experience you could give to this, but what about small organizations? Because we forget that we've got these multinationals, but there's a lot of small companies, particularly, for example, in this world, brokers. So say less than 100 people who don't have huge budgets, probably don't have somebody that's exclusively doing DEI. What can be done? Where are we in location? And the part says also we are in a location that's not diverse, unfortunately. So this is from a particular person that might be somewhere geographically it's not. Anyway, sorry. What can be done, Aggie? do you think?
Sure. So again, there's so many things because yes, budgets help, and yes, having someone who's dedicated to D&I helps. So we'll say that helps. But in smaller organizations, sometimes it's actually easier to turn a boat than to turn a ship. So what I would suggest is you can still have an ERG and have conversations around inclusion, still listen to your people, what's working here, what's not working so well. Because I think one thing that we sometimes miss in these conversations that we're having, yes, it's about ethnicity, yes, it's about inclusion, but it's about human beings. It's about human beings. So let's understand what it's like to work here, what we can do differently, how we can help people progress in the organization. Let's look at events. Lots of small organizations will put on events where they talk about different experiences, whether it's culturally, whether it's identity, whether it's ethnicity as well, so that we're exchanging perspectives, we're exchanging experiences, we're opening up that conversation and helping people to feel heard as well. And then there are events such as this. So if you're an organization with 100 people, have every one of those 100 on an event, listening, hearing, and then you can take away the learnings, think, right, how do we apply it to our organization? There will always be something you can apply to your organization, even without the big budgets.
Charmaine, anything to add?
Yeah, so eloquently responded to by Aggie. I would say that definitely borrowing the term mutual mentorship, which I learned earlier from Maggie, culture and belonging are feelings. And so really allowing space to talk through that with our employees. We leverage LinkedIn Learning for courses and for discussion prompts. We also will have oftentimes book or movie discussions. We focus on meaningful holidays. There's often diversity within diversity. And so not looking at any single group as a monolith and understanding that if we were to really pan out 30,000 feet to the full diversity wheel, all of the identity attributes that make us each unique, there are things there that we could still stand up and have discussions around as folks feel psychologically safe to do so. And so again, just kind of broadening our perspective and then being intentional about doing things like these discussions. And it's my understanding, I've actually tested this for quite a few of the sessions that were at 3 or 4 a.m. my time. The recordings are live within 30 minutes of the discussions. And so a smaller organization could hold a watch session of a recording and actually have some discussion around that and what the implications are for them as an organization.
Brilliant. Thank you, Charmaine. I'm going to move on to another question. I'll come to Ibi, you first, if that's all right, and then to Gunjali. It's a bit more of a kind of specific question. It says, do you think there is a benefit to having separate employee resource groups for different ethnic groups within an organisation? And we have a name that was from Harry Benham. Thank you very much, Harry. I'm very happy to highlight anyone who states their name for a question. But Ibi, any thoughts on that? I don't know what your experience of that is.
I'm probably going to sit on the fence on this one a little bit, because I think one of the challenges we have is the whole topic as a whole, and I worry about kind of taking that down to next levels and starting to almost polarize and kind of hone in. I kind of get why people would ask the question, but it worries me that we then potentially detract from the bigger conversation, which is about I think it was mentioned earlier, but we're all different, right? So I probably wouldn't, if you separated our ERGs into separate ones around different race and ethnicity, I probably wouldn't fit one unless you had one that said other. I'm a half. I'm half English. I'm a quarter Egyptian, a quarter Sudanese. So which one do I go to? So I worry about that debate. And actually, it's more about promoting diversity, accepting people for who they are, regardless of specific ethnicity or race, but trying to encourage more diversity within an organization and finding ways to kind of make that diversity succeed and thrive within an organization. So I don't really know. I think if there's a big body of folk that identify with a certain race or ethnicity, I can understand them wanting to feel like they get their own identity through a network. So I can kind of understand that, but I worry it might detract from the overall conversation. So I guess I'll sit on the fence on it.
Yeah, brilliant. That's very, very, very well articulated. Thank you, Ibi. Gunjali, do you have anything to add?
I'm going to join him on the fence, and I'll do it on. I'll share both sides if that's okay. The first, on the one hand, like you said, Ibi, you want to make people feel seen, heard, valued, and that they belong. And how do you do that? You recognize them, and you recognize their culture or their ethnicity for who they are, and you give them a safe space for them to sort of share that. So there is that aspect. On the other side, I worry very much about exactly what you said, polarization. How small is too small a group? And what is the benefit of that smallness? Because at some point, right, we are all trying to tackle the same thing, which is to advance in leadership, right, or to grow our insurance industry. And so it almost becomes a little bit of a, and this happens to me regularly, because I will get sort of calls for, let's do another ERG, or let's, or this ERG wants to kind of separate out, or be its own sort of, or have a special group only for these people. And I very often will say, I'm not sure if that's a good idea or not, because I want to make sure that we're paying attention to those that are intersectional. And I want to ensure that we are not losing the message, which is we need to work on this together, otherwise it doesn't happen. And this divide and conquer strategy is not the right one for us to follow. So both sides.
Charmaine, did you have something to add?
I do. I wholeheartedly agree that there's a both and response to that. I appreciate Harry's question. And I think the thing to add is how important it is that allies show up to those resource groups. Here we have 7 employee networks, and part of what the magic is when individuals are there simply to listen and learn ways that they can utilize their position, their benefits to extend and bring someone else along. So Gunjali spoke earlier about advocacy and sponsorship and how that's so key. And so really just making sure that we understand that the Women's Network will thrive with men around the table as allies there to sit and listen and learn. And the same if we focus in on our multicultural network or our abilities network, really having other people there at the table to take the notes away and see what types of barriers can they engage with helping to remove, what kind of myths can they help to reset for those that are in the room. I think a lot of times with our employee networks, we charge the networks with being problem solvers, and that's great. But we also need other folks within the system to realize that the barriers that are there, the individuals and the networks didn't create. And so for the most part, being a general member of a network, there is a very light time investment, but the value from sitting and listening and learning is great.
Thank you. Aggie, I'm going to come to you for the next question, if that is okay. It was one of the earlier ones. The questioner says, I am curious, I'm curious as well, but I just want to quote the individual. If there's any conversation around the different approaches to categorizing race/ethnicity data in different parts of the world. There are different identities data being collected, some focusing on heritage, some on skin color, or a combination of that. It's quite complex because of the geographical split in legislation. But how would you respond to that question?
I'm going to try and read it because I'm curious.
Right at the beginning, yes.
Yeah, so the conversations are happening mostly in global organizations, because as we don't know who the person is, that awesome person who asked that question correctly says that there are different characterizations. I think in most cases, organizations are characterizing based on what their country says. So in the UK, as an example, most organizations will lean into the ONS, Office of National Statistics, and they tend to categorize by skin color. And that's what they tend to do. But then others may, so Africa as an example, so if some clients in Africa, they look at ethnicity because their challenges are around ethnicity as opposed to skin color. So I think it really does depend on the organization and where they're based. So the answer is, well, yes, there is a conversation. And I also want to offer a very, very quick alternative view to the previous question. I know that's not what you've asked me to do. You can tell me off later, Johnny. An alternative view, which is, absolutely respect everything that has been shared by the panelists around, obviously not moving away from the message and also not causing, you didn't use the word friction, but that's the word in my head, so causing maybe some friction or polarization. What we do also know is that when you group people together. Just like when we talk about inclusion, we are very clear that when we're talking about inclusion and diversity, we talk about women specifically because women have different challenges than men might have. We might talk about the LGBTQ plus community because they have different challenges than the heterosexual community might have. The same applies within race as well. When we group races together, what you'll tend to find is that the experiences and the outcomes are different within those groups. So I would say that there is some value, especially if your people are potentially asking for it. Maybe there's something missing for them in that particular group where they feel there's a need to have a specific group for different races. And I think if you choose not to, that is okay as well. But just do make sure that when you look at your data, when you look at representation, when you look at the voices that are being heard, there isn't one specific group that's been heard less or more than the others, that you are taking that holistic view as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Aggie. I'm going to push on unless anyone has any objections to that. Question just come in. I hear from leaders that have little diversity in their organisation that they've no problem with race in their organisation. I think highlighting even though there is little diversity, even when their organisations lack diversity, they think it's a meritocracy. So what can you do about that if you work for an organisation where that's the case? Charmaine, can I come to you first and then I'll go to Gunjali if that's okay?
Absolutely. I think this actually layers in well with another question that was posed by Joanne Graham that talks about the new regulations that are coming into the insurance industry around culture and the potential impact of that. I do think that the idea of a meritocracy is very noble. However, it's really about listening to our employees. And I think we've all said that multiple times throughout the conversation, listening to what's said as well as what's not said, listening to the folks that are still here with us as well as those who have left. And so the value of really taking time to explore the exit data for our organizations and seeing across the different diversity dimensions, how are people staying on within the organizations. We talked earlier about retention. These are some of the things that regulators are now also starting to ask for. So very specific questions around age, race, and gender, at least within the United States, of our workforce, the general workforce, as well as looking at executive roles. And so a lot of that is driving the conversation, and it's also driving deliberate action around some of the things that we talked about, the leadership development, the mentoring, because our regulators, the folks who support us, are asking these questions. And so I think that we'll move away from more of those anecdotal temperature checks that senior executives take when they know a few folks by name, to getting to a place where we actually do see more depth with regard to representation. We actually see and hear from folks, as we've discussed earlier, at all levels of the organization that represent real diversity, however that is measured within an organization or a country.
Gunjali, do you have anything you would want to add?
Yes, I think that was brilliant, and that's exactly what's needed. And I'll add one more piece to it, which is if you do an engagement survey, an annual engagement survey, sometimes you can cut that by diversity. And I think that is data that should be shared with your senior executives. One of the most powerful workshops that I went to once was, this was at a different company and somebody else ran it, but it was brilliant. They had taken the verbatims. So, when you get the chance to kind of write things out, put it on Post-it notes, put all of the verbatims on Post-it notes and put them all the way around a conference room. And they walked their executives into the conference room and said, we're going to have 10 minutes of silence. Just read through these, please. And you could sort of see the physical impact of these are your employees saying this. What are you going to do? Right. And it was a very powerful moment, I think, for the leaders to sort of realize that this is true. And sometimes when things are on a screen, they're on a screen and then you can turn it off. But when it's staring at you from a wall, it's difficult to ignore.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to move on to another question, and thank you very much for all the great questions. Aggie, I'm going to come to you and then Ibby afterwards, if that's okay. The question states that in the panel's varied years of experience in the industry, what have they seen as the changes, past and present, of the race conversation in the industry now. So I suppose what have you heard and what are you seeing now and hopefully see in the future in regard to this conversation? Aggie, if I could come to you, please.
Sure. Yeah, great question, given the conversation we're having today. And I think that's going to be the biggest change I'm going to start with, which is that we're having the conversation. I would suggest that in most traditional industries and the insurance industry the same, race wasn't a conversation that was had very often. We definitely focused on gender. That was definitely a big part of the conversation, and probably the only part in most cases. So I'd say, yes, we're definitely talking about it. We've moved now to start taking action. So a lot of the panel talked about the activity that's happening in their organizations that they're seeing as well. And then what I'm hoping that we start to see, which you talked about as well, is having those senior role models in positions as well. So I'd say I'm very hopeful.
Brilliant. Thank you, Aggie. Abby.
Yeah, it's going to be remarkably similar. I was going to say exactly, just the fact we're here today having this conversation is the biggest change I've seen in the last 16 or 17 years in the industry right now. There's no way this would have been a topic of conversation. I think also language has changed. I think anybody who's rewatched The Office recently, which I did the other day, realizes how much the kind of national narrative has changed, but also the narrative within organizations of what's acceptable and what isn't. We've really matured on that sense, because stuff like that wouldn't be acceptable these days, and rightly so. Should never have been. But the thing I struggle to understand, well, I think I understand, I just struggle with a little bit, is it's probably as much as anything been changed in the culture environment outside of the industry and the organizations that's helped as much as anything, rather than the internal push, which I think is something to reflect on and as an industry. And I think we now have the opportunity, as a result of a national change that's generated some internal movements, to really kind of push that on now, because actually it's much more acceptable to have the conversation. It's much more, I can't imagine when I first started talking about my race, my background, being from Sudan, etc. But now it's quite common. And just to continue that conversation, that education piece, and to talk to people and really take advantage of what has happened in the external environment, some of it unfortunate, but some of it helps the conversation, is probably what we should be doing and really focusing on going forward.
Brilliant. Thank you, Evie. I'm going to just bring that question in a bit more depth, to go to first Charmaine and then Gunjali. So when I at the beginning mentioned that, kind of past, present and future, when I highlighted present, there was a kind of question that's been put from them, helpfully from the committee sorting this out, is that have we kind of slightly stalled? Have we taken the impetus that happened from the tragedy of George Floyd, and is now actually, is there a wee bit of pushback? Are we not progressing as quickly as we had been back then? Charmaine, how do you respond to that? Do you think that has happened at all?
I think it could. Yes, absolutely. So when we think about what was happening back in 2020, the atmosphere, the fact that most of us were in our homes due to the global pandemic that was happening, and then add to that the social and racial unrest related to the murder of George Floyd, there were a lot of folks who put their foot on the gas very firmly. And there were a lot of promises that were made that seemed somewhat broad and ambiguous. And so I think what folks are asking for now is, where do we show that we are walking the walk? How do we reflect that those commitments that we made in those moments were true? And I think it's about the consistency. I definitely think, as we're talking about our employee resource groups, understanding that, yes, George Floyd might have had the public's eye across the world because of the things that were happening, but a lot of those incidents are still occurring. And what we are doing on a daily basis, so many folks are coming in and they're carrying some of the weight of anti-Semitic comments that are made, of racist or discriminatory comments that are made, homophobic comments that are made. The isms and the phobias still exist. And the only way that we can turn the needle on that, as Aggie referred earlier, we are turning a very large ship. And in order to do that, we do have to stay as determined. And we have to keep in front of us the idea that this mutual mentoring, these conversations, checking in with people and ask them, how are you feeling? And not just, what are you doing? Is so critical to really understanding workplace well-being and being able to impact that in a positive way. So I would say, yes, I think that there were a lot of organizations that in good faith did make commitments, and I would challenge all of those organizations, my own included. I'm doing the work, and I'm doing the work as supported with our executives, our executive committee, and our employee networks, that we should continue along that path and focus on what is working for us and how can we do more of that. And the only way that we can do that is by listening and learning from, as Gunjali said, the employee engagement surveys, those hallway conversations, being intentional about really using our mentoring time to do those well-being checks with our colleagues and our friends.
Brilliant. Gunjali, anything to add to that at all?
I thought that was very beautifully put. So thank you for that, Charmaine. And you kind of ran the gamut right from, there's action that needs to be done because, the impetus that started with George Floyd is not over. It's continuing, unfortunately, and it still needs to be addressed just because it's not in the news cycle. And then I think where you ended was a really good point, and I want to just double click it if I can, which is that think about what we're doing here right now, right? Think about it as a think tank, right? We're subject matter experts from insurance, from DEI, from adjacent fields like technology. And really the idea is to converse, to exchange, and to share ideas and look at innovative approaches, right? That's kind of what we're doing. What is the value of that? Why do it? Should we not be out there lobbying, translating, advocating, mentoring? We should. And all of that is okay. But as DEI practitioners, one of the things we understand, right, is that sometimes the conversation is the work. And that is a difficult thing to do. Being able to articulate a DEI agenda is the win. Interrupting the bias is the point. Growing representation, and we know this, growing representation is about unlocking people's minds and hearts just as much as it is about moving things forward. And so conversations like these are part of the work that we want to continue to do. So I'll just sort of underline Charmaine's point and leave it there.
Perfect. I'm going to ask one quick question. Aggie, if you would help me with this in terms of your knowledge. So the question is, my observation of DEI professionals in the UK that many lack the data analysis skills to demonstrate disproportionate outcomes, and many have been moved into DEI from unrelated roles. Is it time for a DEI professional qualification?
I would say 100% and wholeheartedly agree that a lot of our colleagues in the DEI space, not on this call clearly, they don't have necessarily the strategic skills. I'll add that as well. Necessarily, they're not able to connect that DEI why to the organization and why it's right for them. They're therefore also not able to look at the data analysis skills. But on top of that, which I think is probably more important, they're not able to articulate the cultural change needed and have the conversation at that level. They almost come in as D&I police almost, which is not always the most helpful approach. So is it time for a D&I professional qualification? I think some learning is definitely needed. If you think about the fact that the function's grown, a lot of new roles, there hasn't been that experience or learning beforehand. So I'd say, I don't know if it has to be a professional qualification, but I do think there needs to be some learning and some education. And for those professionals to be okay to say, I don't know, be okay to say, I need some help, be okay to say, can we bring someone in to support us, which I don't think a lot of us are there yet.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you for being succinct. I am going to say thank you so much to the four of you. It's been, I mean, I cannot believe the button came up and said 5 minutes ago. It's been a real joy. I hope, and by the level of engagement and questions, everyone's enjoyed it. But anything you want to, please go back to dive in. But thank you, and to everybody, unlock innovation and enjoy all the other events that you'll be going to at Dive In. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.